Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the City of Thousand Oaks City Council and Redevelopment Agency for Tuesday, November 9th, 2010. At this time, we'll call the meeting to order. Would you all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and flag presentation by the United States Marine Honor Guard, Thousand Oaks Recruiting Office. The introduction to the Honor Guard is that our city is taking the opportunity tonight to recognize Veterans Day, a holiday that acknowledges those who have served in the armed services. It's a day to remember the privileges we enjoy and that were earned through the dedication of our country's military. These rights that are still being protected at this moment by our men and women in the armed forces. Tonight we're honoring all of those fine men and women. Proud to introduce our United States Marines from our local recruiting office who will conduct this evening's Flag Honor Guard ceremony. Gentlemen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would ask that the audience bow their heads in a moment of silence to remember our military personnel. Please. Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate your commitment to our country, your being here this evening. We wish you all the best, and also we wish you congratulations on the 235th birthday of the United States Marine Corps, November 10th, tomorrow. Thank you. For our unenlightened friends, those M1 Garands that the Marines are carrying weigh 9.5 pounds. They have a muzzle velocity of 26 to 2,800 feet per second and a chamber pressure of 50,000 pounds per square inch. A piece of trivia that I thought everyone would really want to know. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Bill De La Pena is absent at this time. Councilmember Irwin?
Here.
Councilmember Glancy is absent. Councilmember Fox?
Here.
Mayor Gillette?
Here. Item 4, Request for continuance of any public hearing or agenda item. Item 14C, closed session concerning purchase of property has been pulled from the agenda. Item 5, special presentations. If you'll give me a minute to get to the lectern, we'll continue with item 5. This portion of the meeting begins our special presentations. Please give me a moment here, get organized. Before beginning our first presentation, I'd like to thank everyone who stopped by City Hall today to add names to our Military Services Journal. Thousand Oaks is pleased to offer a permanent and unique way for residents to observe their military service as well as that of their family members. Next year, in October, we again invite you to watch the local papers for the next date that the journal will be open. Be sure to add your names to our journal if you missed the opportunity this year. To begin our special presentations, I'd like to ask Mary Olson and Lance Orozco to join me. Mary? Hi. Mary and Lance are two popular celebrities from our local radio station, KCLU 88.3 FM. We're pleased to have them back with us again. Last year, they were here to recognize KCLU's award-winning achievements in news coverage. KCLU reporters have been honored with scores of awards in news reporting, and KCLU has received 6 Golden Mike Awards from the Radio and Television News Association of Southern California, more than any other Ventura or Santa Barbara station. Tonight, we'd like to congratulate them on receiving the 2010 National Edward R. Murrow Award. This award was based on Lance Orozco's Best Audio Sports Reporting in Small Market Radio Division for the story, The Oldest Dodger. Lance and Mary, congratulations. We have a commendation for you, if I may. This commendation is in honor of KCLU 88.3 FM. KCLU was presented the celebrated 2010 National Edward R. Murrow Award from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting recognizes contributions to public radio by individuals whose work has fostered the quality and positive image of public radio. And KCLU's news director, Lance Orozco, received the award for Best Audio Sports Reporting in the Small Market Radio Division for his story, The Oldest Dodger, the story of Tony McClinsky, the oldest living former member of the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team. And KCLU is the only small market radio station in California presented the 2010 Murrow Award. KCLU has won more than 140 regional awards for broadcasting excellence in the past decade. And KCLU is to be congratulated for its professional achievements and exemplary service to our community. Now, therefore, I, Dennis C. Gillette, Mayor of the City of Thousand Oaks, on behalf of the entire City Council, do hereby commend KCLU 88.3 FM on receiving the 2010 National Edward R. Murrow Award and for consistently providing informative and engaging broadcasting. Congratulations to both of you. Congratulations.
Mayor Gillette and distinguished council members, Scott Mitnick, City Manager, thank you so much. I'm here today to just say thank you for honoring us in this way. On behalf of the CLU administration, the entire KCLU team, and our 300-plus volunteers, thank you so much. We are very aware how lucky we are to be right here in Thousand Oaks and to have the support of such a distinguished city council and so many members of the community. We appreciate it and we thank you. Although KCLU has been mentioned here tonight, this award solely goes to Lance Orozco, and all the recognition should go to Lance Orozco. His tireless dedication and his absolute commitment to serving all of us right here in Ventura County has been recognized nationally. On just a side note here, there are 15,000 radio stations in the United States. They chose 89 stations across the country to win an award, and Lance was one of the 89 chosen. He won the same award as Brian Williams. It was unbelievable. So just know that this is all about him. Thank you for recognizing him locally as well, and thank you for honoring him and our station in this way. I'm proud to call him a colleague and friend.
And if I could just say, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, thank you so much for taking some of your valuable time, staff members too, because I cover meetings like this and I know that you guys have a lot of things that you have to deal with. We're very proud to be here in Thousand Oaks, and I want to point out that 10 years ago, there were 3 radio stations here in Thousand Oaks. Remember AM 850, and there was what you know as KNGO, it's now Jill FM. We are the only station now that has studios in Thousand Oaks. We're your only station that's really local anymore. So when things happen like the fire that we had across the 101 freeway just a couple of weeks ago, you know, we try to be there for the community, and we're very proud to be a part of Thousand Oaks, and we appreciate your support over our 16 years of existence. So thank you for this.
Also, Mary, congratulations on that brand new building.
Mid-March. Thank you, Mayor.
Wonderful. Congratulations. Thank you. Our next presentation is to a group who have served in our country's military services as well as continuing to serve our residents today. I'd like to ask Gene Ogden, Adjutant of the Thousand Oaks Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 11395, to join me. Gene? That's good, guys. Gene, we'd like to thank you, our local VFW post, for their continuing service to our city. Each year, VFW members sponsor a patriotic flag observance in the Mary and Richard Carpenter Park that celebrates our nation's heritage. As part of this, they include a dignified flag retirement ceremony at which worn American flags are collected from the community and incinerated at a local mortuary. And for the past 3 years, they've offered to work one day in November to staff our military services journal desk. Our VFW members work behind the scenes in the community to educate people on the importance of our country's principles and traditions. Gentlemen and ma'am, come on where you can get seen out there. You guys are hiding back there. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to present you with this certificate of appreciation. This commendation is in honor of the Eric Hubereth Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 11395. The Eric Hubereth Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 11395 has served the city of Thousand Oaks on many levels, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 11395 has been a valuable community partner. Their sponsorship of the annual Flag Day recognition and patriotic flag retirement ceremony each June highlights the importance of our American heritage. And the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post has staffed the city's annual Military Services Journal display on Veterans Day since 2008. This journal commemorates our residents and their family service in the United States Armed Forces. Veterans of Foreign Wars Post has provided camaraderie, and formed a unique band between our service men and women who have common experiences defending this country. And the Eric Hubereth Post, Veterans of Foreign Wars 11395, has provided exemplary service to the City of Thousand Oaks and our nation. So now, therefore, I, Dennis C. Gillette, Mayor of the City of Thousand Oaks, on behalf of the entire City Council, do hereby commend Eric Hubereth, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 11395, for your outstanding commitment, energy, and patriotism in promoting the awareness of veteran sacrifice to our country. Congratulations, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming down.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the City Council for giving us some recognition. I'm also very happy to see that there are poppies on most of you. That's how we gain our funds. Twice a year we do poppy drives around Memorial Day and around Veterans Day. And we, although we're based in Thousand Oaks, we reach out to any disabled, needy, or homeless veteran in Ventura County, and we get quite a few calls. Once again, I thank you very much. We've been involved in the Ventura County Stand Down for the homeless veterans for 18 years, amongst other things. Thank you very much.
Let's just step over to the side and get a picture here. Our concluding presentation, I'd like to introduce Nancy Kilburn, member of the Daughters of the American Revolution and California State Chair of the American Indian Committee. Nancy, would you please join me? Tonight, the City Council of Thousand Oaks is proclaiming November 2010 as Native American Heritage Recognition Month. The history and culture of our great nation has been significantly influenced by the American Indians. Their contributions have enhanced the freedom, prosperity, and greatness of America. Nancy, would you like to tell us about the work you're doing and how this rich legacy is being celebrated?
I'm the California State Chair for the American Indian Committee. The NSDAR was founded in 1890, and we are the largest women's organization in the world. Membership requires descent from someone who assisted colonists in the Revolution. Our basic mission is to promote historic preservation, education, and patriotism. The Canal Valley chapter is one of the larger chapters in the state. We have over 150 members. The National American Indian Committee was founded in 1936. Our committee supports Chemawa in Salem, Oregon, which is the oldest Bureau of Indian Affairs boarding high school, and Bacone College in Oklahoma, which was founded for Indians. We also support the American Indian Youth Summer Camp, which works with high school students and helps to train future leaders. We offer 3 national scholarships, and the students applying must be enrolled in a tribe. We have the American Indian Scholarship, the Francis Crawford Marvin American Indian Scholarship, and the Ann Trevarthen Memorial Scholarship. This latter one is limited to William and Mary College. The California DAR also offers a scholarship. The students need not be a native Californian Indian, but must reside in this state and be enrolled in a tribe. DAR chapters close to military installations also work with and for American Indian Service personnel and veterans. And Thanksgiving is coming up, and I would like for you to remember that when you sit down to that meal, please give a special prayer of thanks to the American Indians. They were the greatest farmers on this planet. The foods that we eat at Thanksgiving are Native American: turkey, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, green beans, sweet potatoes, sugar, pineapple, cranberries, pecans, chocolate, vanilla. All of these things and a lot more were produced by American Indians. The Europeans and Africans didn't have a whole lot to eat. So when you sit down, say thank you for this meal.
Nancy, thank you very much. And let me present you with this proclamation in honor of National American Indian Heritage Month. And it's my honor that I, Dennis Gillette, Mayor of the City of Thousand Oaks, on behalf of the entire City Council, do hereby proclaim November 2010 as National American Indian Heritage Month and urge all citizens to observe this month with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities. Congratulations, and thank you for coming down. Okay, at this time, we'll move to item 6, public comments. Would the clerk please call item 6?
This is the time and place for public comments. A speaker card is available for those wishing to address the City Council regarding items on the agenda or on a subject within the city's jurisdiction. All speakers for public hearings shall be called and heard during the public hearing. Pursuant to council standards of operation, the mayor may assist any speaker from straying into areas not within the city's jurisdiction. All remarks should be addressed to the City Council as a whole. Under state law, issues discussed under public comments can have no action unless listed on the agenda and may be referred to the city manager for administrative action or scheduled on a subsequent agenda. All documents for City Council and the official city record should be presented to the city clerk prior to speaking. Speakers are requested to state their name and community of residence for the record. 5 people have presented cards, and pursuant to council standards, speakers are allowed 3 minutes. The yellow light displays when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you very much. Our first speaker this evening, Jeffrey Bride, followed by Mr. Nick Kidwai. Good evening.
Mayor, good evening, council, staff. 3 issues. Jeff Bride, Newbury Park, Thousand Oaks. There's 3 issues I wanted to bring up. One has to do with tonight's agenda. That's the 12 A and B regarding the health care. I have no problem allowing for health care coverage while members serve in the city council. However, I do object to continued health care coverage for members after they do leave the council. I think it's a large burden for myself and the rest of the taxpayers, and I ask for you to review that and look into possibly terminating that when service is terminated as well. Number 2, I attended a information session on the Newbury Park solar panel proposal. The proposal is to spend $1.2 million. That's a lot of money. I know the city wants to save money. I know it's part of your priorities, but perhaps there's other ways we can do that, maybe doing a flex day, cutting back on hours, looking at other ways rather than putting $1.2 million into solar, which I don't think is a proven technology. And number 3, water rates. I have a conundrum that I need answered. First is that we asked us to conserve water. We conserve water, but our rates continue to go up, and I'm wondering why they continue to go up even though we're conserving water. Maybe someone like Scott or can get back to me on that, because that's an issue, a question I have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Nick Kidway, followed by Laura Pappenfuss. Evening, Mr. Kidway.
Good evening, Mayor Gillette. I begin in the name of God, who is most beneficial, most merciful. My name is Nick Iqbal Kidwai, resident of Newberry Park, and Dr. Glancy is not here. He likes to hear that I am Director of Concerned Citizens of Thousand Oaks. I hope he is doing well. First of all, I mean, meaning to say this, but I don't know what happened, but it's almost impossible now to park in the parking lot now because they think I'm trying to save $8.50. But aside from the money, I mean, I don't have, like most people, I don't have a lot of extra time, so I come in the nick of time, and if I go there, I won't be able to speak in public comments. And this is really ridiculous to treat taxpayers like this. Mr. Hughes has a letter in the paper that this theater originally was promised to be $2 million, and look what happened. I want to congratulate the mayor and the other 2 council people for re-election. I think the mayor is winning by 72 votes, but a win is a win is a win. I have done some analysis, which I would like TOTV to show about the election. Kind of shows the power of money in some ways. The total spent by incumbents on this race was $121,000 and change. The total spent by the challengers was $97,000, so it was a little bit shy. But in that I excluded Mr. Al Adam, who was basically like an incumbent, in my opinion, and the opinion of other people, because he was running with a council person. But the interesting thing is that the total incumbent vote of all 3 is approximately 50,000, and the total challengers got 53,689. So the challengers won, but they did not win in the logical sense that they will not be sitting on the dais. If we subtract Mr. Adam, that was about 40,000, which was still a substantial amount. But the interesting thing is that the 8 challengers minus Mr. Brandon, Milan, and Al spent only $12,000 cumulatively and got 27,000 votes or 36,000 votes. I cannot read that quickly. Since there is not much time, I would like to say that we had a terrible planning commission meeting yesterday about the auto mall sign. I would really appreciate, one of the points was made that there will be a federal ruling about the dangers, and that you should have the council meeting after you read that. As well as, even being a member of the committee, there really has not been shown a video of what's the difference between what is being proposed in the digital sign versus animated signs, etc. So when you have the report, there is still time right now, you should include that so that you can make a good decision and the citizens know what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura Pappenfuss, followed by Sharon Noel.
Good evening, Laura Pappenfuss. I live in Newberry Park. Good evening, Mayor, and congratulations to the incumbents and staff. Tonight I have 2 items I'd like the council to take under consideration. And I'm going to go ahead and just read what I wrote so I don't get off topic and I get what I want to say across. After building a small business in the city and experiencing the ins and outs of running a small business, I'm very excited about the plans to improve the exterior of many businesses on Thousand Oaks Boulevard. I feel very fortunate to operate a business and live in a city that cares about its retailers and its success. Although the plans to facelift Teal Boulevard will enhance the exterior of many buildings, I would ask council to consider assistance to businesses that have been grandfathered in and are not to code. As I have looked into locations on T.O. Boulevard, it is apparent that many of them, restaurants in particular, are so out of code that it is virtually impossible for existing owners or operators or prospective new tenants to do any interior improvements without pulling permits, which would then require the entire building to be brought to code. This requirement almost triples the construction cost, not to mention the design and architectural fees that are associated with such an undertaking. An existing business would have to close a minimum of 3 months while continuing to pay rent with no business coming in. In this current economy and the inability for small businesses to get loans, I don't know how it will be possible for these businesses or potential businesses that don't have deep pockets to afford this cost. It's such a shame that they will have beautiful exteriors, but their interiors will look exactly as they do now. If the businesses are able to afford remodeling, it will enhance the level of clientele and more money will be spent in our city. At this time, I would ask the city to expand the scope of the redevelopment funds to assist those businesses on T.O. Boulevard to update their interiors to meet current codes. On a second note, again, I'm thankful that I live in a city that supports local businesses, as most recently the contracting of a consultant and recent improvements for the Lake Shopping Center. As you know, the Paricio Shopping Center in Dos Vientos opened with a handful of tenants and has lost 10 tenants in this last year and shows no signs of substantial occupancy. I'm asking that the city consider hiring a consultant to look at the center to see what can be done so we don't lose any more businesses in Thousand Oaks. Thank you for your consideration on these items, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Noel, followed by Dick Thompson. Good evening.
Good evening, City Council members. My name is Sharon Noel, and I live in Moore Park. I'm here tonight to announce an important event, and it was interesting that Nancy Kilborn spoke just ahead of me because she kind of said a lot that I don't have to say now. So this event is to benefit the Indians in the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and it has been spearheaded by Gray Wolf, who is going to hold this benefit at the Chumash Indian Museum, or also known as the Indian Interpretive Center, at 3290 Lang Ranch Parkway in Thousand Oaks. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is in South Dakota. It's one of the largest. It's also the poorest reservation in the country. Population there is about 28,000, and half live below poverty standards. And so donations will be taken at the door. It will be $10 for adults, $5 for kids 12 to 5 years old, and under 5 is free. And all the proceeds will go to a fund for propane to heat the homes of the most needy people there at Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. So the event is this Saturday, November 13th, from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. And I'll leave flyers here so that they can get to you, City Council. Any information, you could contact Gray Wolf at 492-8076. And that's, I hope that I can see all of you there. Thank you. Good night.
Would you like to repeat that number slowly for the viewing audience?
Okay. The phone number, 492-8076, and the time is 1 to 8 p.m. this Saturday at the Chumash Interpretive Center on Lang Ranch Parkway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you want to just present the papers to the city clerk right there, there you go. And our final speaker, Mr. Dick Thompson. Mr. Thompson.
Good evening. My name is Dick Thompson. I'm here on behalf of the Ventura County Taxpayers Association, and I live in Oxnard. A few short weeks ago, I appeared before you to comment on the City Council retirement health care benefits. So I was pleased to see the article in today's Star that you will be considering action tonight to move forward with a review of those benefits. On behalf of our association, I say well done and commend you, Mayor Gillette, for taking quick action, and we urge the Council to take a favorable position on his recommendation. I also want to thank your City Manager, Mr. Mitnick, and Assistant City Manager, Ms. Hong, for the time they spent meeting with us and for a very good discussion about this item and about the financial health of Thousand Oaks. My impression is that your city is well served by these two professionals. Finally, I want to simply state once more that the retirement health care benefit for City Council members needs to be eliminated. There's no justification in our minds for such an overly generous benefit for a part-time job that kicks in after only 5 years. It is simply not a defensible use of taxpayer dollars. We also strongly believe that the opportunity for a city employee to receive a full retirement health care benefit with only 5 years of employment at retirement is too generous and deserving of review. There are any number of practices and formulas that could yield a more reasonable and appropriate policy, and we hope the Council will move forward to review this item as well. Thank you for your time. We look forward to positive outcomes from your review process.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That concludes our speakers under public comments. Well, if it's lost, it's probably me. Let's wait just a minute here. 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, why don't you, sir? Why don't you come up, introduce yourself, and we'll.
My name's Bill Hicks. I come from
Mr.
Newbury
Hicks,
Park.
just a minute. That's fine. It got put up. You put the wrong. No, we've got it. So we've got the card. Our final speaker will be Mr. William Bill Hicks. Mr. Hicks, please.
Okay. Thank you so much. I come to request that you reconsider and review the adoption of the state's building code. The section that I'm most concerned about is the uniform solar energy section. I, too, was at the Newbury Park library for the solar panel community meeting. I know that the city considered the things of aesthetics, and true, they are not attractive, but that is the least of my concerns. My concern is the cost effectiveness of that source of energy. A product that cost $1.2 million gets an ARRA grant of $400,000 approximately, has a 15-year payback, and then it has a potential lifespan of only 25 years. That's not cost effective to me. And once it's paid for and it's done, are you going to be able to go back and get new ARRA funds to be able to then repair or replace those panels? Or is it going to fall on the city of Thousand Oaks to have to pay for the total maintenance and replacement or repair of those panels? That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hicks. Sure. Okay. That concludes our speakers under the public comment section. In order to minimize the inconvenience to our audience, I've asked again the city manager who has, if he has any comments on any of the presentations that were given. Mr. Mitnick.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'll follow up with the speakers who requested additional information. First speaker with questions about the library solar panel project, water conservation. Staff will follow up with that, as well as with the speaker on some suggestions and questions about the use of redevelopment or city funds to help businesses. And we'll put something on the city website for the event this weekend at the Chumash Interpretive Center. The last speaker spoke on a consent item, so when we get to the consent calendar, John Prescott or Dave Huners or whomever would be glad to clarify that point when you get to the consent calendar. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitnick. We'll move to item 7, consent calendar, City and Redevelopment Agency consent calendar. Could I ask Mr. Watkins, where are you? If you could give us, I'm going to ask specific focus on item G, the 101 Wendy Drive Interchange Improvement Project. Could you give us just a brief update on that particular project before we deal with the rest of the consent calendar, please? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Gillette, members of the audience, members of City Council. Item 7G is an additional appropriation for the project that we're currently in design for, the Route 101 at Wendy Drive interchange. That project started several years back, and we actually started the design last year. These are improvements to widen the bridge, and the item before Council tonight is to add to that scope of work the widening of the southbound off-ramp. That wasn't originally included in the project scope, and then as we've watched traffic patterns out there more closely, it became very apparent that there's backing up and stacking on the freeway on that southbound off-ramp. And so the item before you tonight would make that southbound on-ramp 2 lanes and eliminate that stacking onto the freeway. At this point, the design of that project is about 65% complete. We'll have the design complete early next spring, probably in the March-April timeframe, and then we'll be ready to go to bid. Currently, the construction cost is estimated in the $12–13 million range. We do have a several million-dollar shortfall, and so we're actively seeking the funds that we need so that we can ask council to go to bid and hopefully award that project by the end of next summer and get the construction started. And so with this action tonight, we would finish the design for that, and we're, like I said, we're actively looking for the remainder of the funds for construction, and if all goes well, we'll be coming back early summer to ask City Council to authorize the bidding of the project.
Okay, Mr. Watkins, thank you very much. If you want to just stay up there in case there are any additional questions and into the actual action on the consent calendar. Give me just a minute, please. Okay, item 7L, ordinance for second reading. Mr. Prescott, did you have information on that? If you would, please give us an update.
Yes, just a couple of points. First of all, item 7L is the second reading and adoption of the ordinance, which the council introduced at its last meeting to adopt the California Building Code and the Electrical Code and the Solar Energy Code and the Residential Code and the Green Building Code and the Plumbing Code as the city's codes with local amendments. One of those codes is the Solar Energy Code, And again, the format of all of this is the State Building Standards Commission updates all of the codes roughly every 3 years, and then all local agencies in the state have to adopt those codes, and that's what we did at your last meeting, or introduce the ordinance to adopt them. Local agencies may make changes to those codes as long as the changes are more restrictive. So the ordinance that's up for adoption tonight is adopting the California codes plus the local amendments. With respect to the solar energy code, the only local amendments are really designating certain individuals to perform certain roles that are defined in that code, such as the building official being the approving authority, and then cross-referencing to other parts of the code for administrative items such as Board of Appeals, authority, permits, etc. Doesn't really have anything to do with the Newbury Park solar project. Next week, on your regular agenda of November 16th, you'll be hearing, as a public hearing, the appeal of the Planning Commission decision on the Newbury Park solar project and other aspects of the contracting relating to that project. So I think the gentleman's concerns really related to that project, and they're really more pertinent to the item you'll be hearing next week than this particular item.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions of Mr. Prescott on 7L? Since that requires a title reading, what's the pleasure of the council? Mrs. Irwin?
Just to move 7L?
Okay.
Yeah.
A motion, discussion of the motion. Please vote.
That motion carries 4-0 with Councilmember Glancy absent, and the ordinance title is an ordinance adding to the Municipal Code, new chapters 1, the Building Code, 6, the Mechanical Code, 7, Residential Code, 8, Plumbing Code, 10, Electrical Wiring Code, 14, the Uniform Solar Energy Code, and 16, Green Building Standards, of Title 8 relating to building division and adopting California Building, Residential, Green Building Standards, Mechanical, Plumbing, and Electrical Codes, the 2010 edition, and Uniform Solar Energy Code, 2009 edition, by reference, and repealing existing chapters 1, 6, 8, 10, and 14 of Title 8 of the Municipal Code.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lawrence. Council, the will of the council on the rest of the consent calendar. Mrs. Irwin.
I'd like to pull 7I.
7I. Anything else?
No. Is there anything else? Otherwise, I'll move the rest of the consent calendar.
Okay. I have a motion to move the rest of consent with the exception of I. Comments to the motion? Please vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you, Mrs. Lawrence. We'll take item 7I, approved expenditure. Mrs. Irwin, you had questions on that, staff?
Yeah. This is for Mr. Watkins about the 3 stop signs in Lynbrook. Those 3 stop signs they met the warrants because there was a sight distance issue, but there was no traffic commission hearing. Is that correct?
No, these did go to Traffic Commission.
Oh, they did?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't see that listed anywhere. So all the neighbors were informed that these stop signs were going in?
Yeah, these are similar to some stop signs that council approved within the last month or so. Typically on these minor streets, we don't install stop signs for volume reasons because there's just not enough volume. But in cases where somebody calls in and requests it, we'll go out and look at sight distance, and that's what these are a reaction to, is actually a request from the neighborhood. And so we've done some additional striping in the neighborhood. We're doing the stop sign installations, and really the concern out there that's been expressed to us is speeding on Jans Road, because there are no houses that front on Jans. All the houses front on the side streets. And so because of those speeds, when people are entering Jan's from some of the side streets, the stop sign gives them that opportunity to stop and assess the speeds before they get out. So these were a request from the neighborhood.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because I hadn't read in there that it went through the Traffic Commission, so I probably just missed that.
We should have mentioned that, sorry.
All right, and so then I will move 7I.
I have a motion to move 7I. Comments to the motion? There being none, please vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. We'll now move to our public hearings. Item 8A. Would the city clerk please open the hearing?
Hearing advertised as required by law is open to consider agenda item 8A, municipal code amendment regarding definitions and zoning for housing for people with special needs, including homeless people and persons with disabilities, MCA 2010-70282. A speaker card is available for those wishing to address the City Council regarding this public hearing. All documents for City Council and the official city records should be presented to the City Clerk prior to speaking, and speakers are requested to state their name and community of residence for the record. We have one person who has presented a card, and that speaker is allowed 5 minutes, and the yellow light displays when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Mrs. Lawrence. The staff report, Mr. Jeff Spector, Senior Planner. Mr. Spector, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm here tonight to present a municipal code amendment, the purpose of which is to implement programs that are contained in the housing element of the general plan for the City of Thousand Oaks. That housing element was adopted last April, and it contains actually 32 programs to address the housing needs of all residents of the city. This particular amendment happens to address the housing element programs that are intended to help persons with special needs. That includes homeless individuals and persons with disabilities. The topics that are addressed in this amendment, there's quite a few, are listed here. They include definitions of various terms, regulations concerning single-room occupancy housing, assisted living facilities for elderly citizens, residential care facilities for disabled persons, reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities, transitional and supportive housing, and emergency shelters. We began this amendment with revising or adding definitions for various terms, whether it's improving existing definitions, adding definitions that are used in the code but were undefined, or adding definitions for terms that are not in the current code but with this amendment need definition. Another topic has to do with single-room occupancy housing. One of the housing element programs requires the city to provide zoning for this type of housing. These sort of housing, in a simplified way, are apartment houses that include studio apartments or efficiency units, otherwise known as efficiency units. And these are units in which the eating and sleeping and living areas are all situated in one room. With this definition, the amendment will allow this kind of housing, single-room occupancy housing, in those zones that allow apartments. And that includes the R3 zone and the residential plan development zones that allow multiple family housing. A second item that we're addressing in this amendment is required through a housing element program that requires us to establish zoning for residential care facilities for 7 or more persons. Facilities for less than 7 facilities, state law preempts local zoning authority with respect to those facilities. These are facilities that provide non-medical care for persons who need assistance to sustain the basic activities of daily living. Those kinds of activities are people who, activities related to eating, transferring, and bathing, that sort of thing. There's a definition for these facilities with 7 or more, that accommodates 7 or more people, and they're called large residential care facilities. And they would be allowed with a special use permit in the commercial office zone and in public land zones. And they're also subject to a rebuttable presumption that facilities located within 300 feet of another facility would result in an overconcentration. A similar kind of facility that helps people who need help dealing with the basic activities of daily living are assisted living facilities. These facilities are synonymous, or the term is synonymous with the term rest home, which is somewhat outdated. That's used in the current code. These are facilities for elderly persons who need assistance that we talked about. So we're going to replace the proposal here is to replace the outdated term rest homes with the term assisted living facilities. This amendment would also remove assisted living facilities as a permitted use in the rural agricultural and the rural exclusive zones, and allow these facilities in the commercial office, public lands, and the R1 and R2 zones with a special use permit. As far as reasonable accommodations, this is sort of a confusing term. State law requires the city to adopt procedures to consider requests for exceptions to our regulations based on disability to enable persons with disabilities to use and enjoy a home. There's a section of the Ordinance 31 that creates the procedures for granting reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities. The issue of transitional and supportive housing has to do with the issue of affordability, homelessness, housing for persons with disabilities. And these are facilities that have transitional housing and supportive housing, for the most part, differ in terms of the length of stay. Transitional housing provides residences for people who are formerly homeless and allows them to transition into permanent housing. And the length of stay is 6 months or more. This is housing that's intended to transition. The people there would not stay there permanently. They would vacate that unit and enter permanent housing. Supportive housing is longer-term housing, and it's specifically designed to provide support and residences for low-income people with disabilities. Now, the law of California requires the city to allow these types of housing subject to the same standards as conventional housing. And this amendment will implement that program. Emergency shelters, otherwise known as homeless shelters, provide housing for homeless individuals for no more than 6 months. That's a definition in state law, and we mirror that definition in the code, the proposed code amendment. The housing element and state law require the city to allow homeless shelters or emergency shelters by right in at least one zoning designation, to consider allowing them in other zoning designations with a special use permit, and allows the city to adopt standards for developing and managing these shelters. One thing that is important to note is the scope of the problem as it pertains to Thousand Oaks. And there have been counts that were prepared in 2007, 2009, and 2010 of people who were sleeping outdoors or in our winter shelters, rotating winter shelters. And you can see that over those 3 years, the number of people that were counted varied greatly, from 56 people in 2007 to as many as 119 people in 2009. As far as the winter shelter, which is sometimes referred to as a cold weather shelter, up to 32 people on a given night use those facilities. The proposed amendment before you tonight would allow emergency shelters by right in one particular portion of the city, which is the 349-acre Specific Plan 15. This is an area generally west of Rancho Canal Boulevard. It's an industrial area. Most of the businesses are light industrial, offices, and distribution facilities. This amendment would also allow shelters with a special use permit in the C2, M1, and M2 zones, which comprise approximately 1,500 acres. And then, in addition to that, it would allow emergency shelters with a special use permit in the public land zone. But it wouldn't apply to public lands that are designated open space, like parks and golf courses. As I said before, there are particular standards that the law allows cities to adopt for emergency shelters, and this is important when it comes to shelters that would be allowed by right in the Specific Plan 15. For example, the proposed standard would be that the operator would maintain a staff ratio, staff per resident of 1 to 15. There would be a maximum length of stay, for example, of 6 months, and there would be no cap on the number of residents in the facility. This amendment is exempt from CEQA. There's no potential that it would have a significant effect on the environment. The Planning Commission reviewed this amendment back in September and recommended approval as presented by staff, except for 2 items. The Commission recommended changing the length of stay from 6 months in a year to 6 months at a time, and the Commission removed the suggested 35-person cap on the number of residents, and staff concurs with the Commission's amendments. Staff recommends that City Council introduce the ordinance as presented, thereby approving the Municipal Code Amendment 2010-70282 as recommended by the Planning Commission and by staff. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Spector. Questions of staff? Mrs. Irwin.
Thank you, Mr. Spector. I have a question about the homeless shelters. Initially, staff had recommended the 6-month maximum stay per year and a 35-person limit, and those seem to me like, I know, hopefully it's Ms. Brunecki that's going to be the speaker, that hopefully she has some insight as to why we would lift the cap on the number of residents in a shelter. It seems like you could end up with an uncontrollable situation or a real neighborhood issue if you have an unlimited number of residents in a shelter. So could you shed some light on why the Planning Commission went that way and the staff is recommending that now?
Well, it's very difficult to predict the future, and we know while roughly 32 people has been the maximum number of people who have used our winter shelter, there are far more homeless individuals in the city at any given time. And so it's a matter of judgment, I think, as to what the need might be in the future. How many of those people that didn't use the winter shelter might use this, because this would be a year-round shelter.
Okay. But couldn't you also run into problems right now? You have no homeless shelter in, I think, this area of the county, and we're looking at maybe maximum, whatever the homeless number is right now in Thousand Oaks, there could be people from all over the county coming in, and you're still saying that you would recommend a unlimited number of people. I'm just worried about the effect on the neighborhood. Wouldn't it be better to have, let's say, a 35-person limit so everybody knows what they're getting into, and then some, if there's an exception, come back to council? I'm just worried that this is going to create a large neighborhood issue.
Well, certainly there's adjacent uses that would be affected by any emergency shelter, and the larger the number, the greater the concern. But the issue here is what is the balancing act between allowing these uses, which are necessary, and controlling them. And I don't know if we can pick a magic number, but
we're not picking any number.
Now, yeah. Perhaps our speaker would like to address that.
Okay. And then the other thing is changing the maximum stay to 6 months at a time. Obviously, somebody could stay for 6 months and then leave for a day and then come back for 6 months. If there is a limit on the number of residents that, or the number of people that can stay in a shelter, isn't it possible that allowing somebody kind of ongoing to stay in that shelter keeps somebody else out?
It's possible, and I visited a couple of shelters, one in Oxnard and one in Lancaster, and the personal stories are varied, and the personal situations are varied, and for the most part, the operators are trying to serve as many people as possible and not to let somebody stay on for extended periods of time rather than seek permanent shelter. But there are cases, individuals that maybe they go to a home that they think they're going to be at permanently, and they, for one reason or another, have to come back and seek shelter. And it's very helpful to have flexibility in those cases to help those people.
But there's no way really to say that, given this, there's no way to say after a year or 2 years that that resident has been there long enough, if you're not putting a limit on it.
I think it would be very exceptional that would be allowed if there's people who haven't been served.
How could it not be allowed if the rule is you can, yes.
I think one thing we have to remember is the definition says an emergency shelter shall mean housing with minimal supportive services is limited occupancies for 6 months or less by a homeless person. But I think the intent of it is that a shelter itself is going to be policing itself, that if the city felt that what was happening is that what was supposed to be temporary transitional housing under this circumstance, under our definition, was turning into long-term years that you had the same people living there, it becomes a very different use, and the city could then step in to enforce that 6 months rule. And I think when you look at what staff had originally recommended, which was a little bit narrower, versus what's written here, it just gives us more flexibility and allows the operator of the shelter a little more flexibility. Because I think Jeff's right that this type of thing can happen, that someone will be there usually, and the provider can speak more to this, but if something occurs and a person leaves and then they lose that housing or it doesn't come through or they leave for a short time, that they can come back. But the whole point of this use is for a temporary, not a permanent, and that when you look at the continuum of care, you move from an emergency shelter to more possibly transitional living, which is a longer period, and then to permanent. So there is the ability with the definition for us to step in, but of course, it's also up to the council, if it's your prerogative, to tighten this up more as originally done, but we can enforce what's written here as well.
I certainly understand in those extenuating circumstances that you're describing. I just, as Mr. Spector described it, I wouldn't want it, it's not even fair to the occupants there if it turns into a situation where it's not emergency shelter and they're not moving toward transitional housing. So I don't understand how you can force them out if you don't have it written as a rule, if you don't have some parameters on it.
Well, there's a difference, and I think the Ms. Burdecki will speak to this, because there is a difference with their rules versus our zoning ordinance and what we're trying to accomplish as a use. Okay.
Additional, Mr. Fox?
Yeah, my questions actually center around the residential care facilities and the assisted living facilities. I recognize that 6 or less is regulated by the state. Maybe you can clarify a little bit more the language as it relates to the 300-foot spacing between these facilities.
There's actually, even in state law concerning some classifications of 6 or fewer, is even a spacing requirement like that to try to prevent an over-concentration in particular neighborhoods. And this mimics that for the larger facilities, 7 or more, the assumption is that they should be separated. There shouldn't be clusters of these facilities.
All right, it's a bit of a touchy issue, but I can tell you my experience recently in walking precincts during the campaign. There are areas of Thousand Oaks that staff should be aware of that do in fact have a number of these facilities on the same street, certainly in the same neighborhood. I'm not quite sure if we're looking at in terms of licensing versus non-licensing, but it seemed like it clearly was affecting what was a residential area into now it certainly is a change, for that area.
Yeah, the residential care facilities, there's quite a range of the types of facilities, and in state law we're talking about 6 or fewer now in single-family neighborhoods generally. The facilities, the vast majority of these facilities, 6 or fewer, cater to elderly persons. Those, under state law, there is no separation requirement. And that's might be, I'm not sure, but that might be what you were seeing.
It was, and so again, and I'm not taking issue with the need, certainly for the folks that are in these facilities, and it is a change for that residential area. There's certainly structural changes in the homes. Many of the homes have large vans for transportation in the driveway, and people coming and going at different hours of the evening because they're 24-hour care, which is very different for a residential area. I don't know, is the city precluded from taking a look at how many of these facilities could be placed, for example, on one street or in a given area?
Well, when it pertains to the care facilities for the elderly, we don't have authority to dictate the placement of those facilities or the operation.
So theoretically, you could have 10 straight homes in a residential area, all with 5 or 6 elderly care folks getting 24-hour around-the-clock care.
Theoretically, yes.
And we would be precluded from taking any kind of look at that.
That's my understanding. I don't know if city attorney has wants to weigh in at all.
We're very limited, and it's, we may be fortunate that in our city it's more an issue of some of the elderly homes, because in other areas the issues of housing for certain rehab programs, if it's 6 or fewer, can also very much impact neighborhoods. It's not just state law. Even if state law says 300 feet, we have to be really careful because federal law preempts everything, and you all of these different types of uses, you run into issues that are protected classes. And under Fair Housing Acts, especially under the federal law, it's very difficult to even make the argument of overconcentration in a neighborhood and the change of the neighborhood. And the whole idea is that whether it's rightfully or wrongfully, especially at the state level, that 6 people living in a home is no different than a family of 6 or whatever. I mean, we all see the differences. You can see what it can do to a neighborhood, but we're very, very limited. And that's why we were really careful in the way this was written, because we were walking that fine line of what state law allows us to do and being very cognizant of federal requirements that are constitutional issues and fair housing law issues.
Yeah, I recognize it is a complex issue, and there are a number of these type uses that are in fact concentrated in 1 or 2 areas in the community and several on the same street. And so in fairness to the neighbors, that's a genuine change in their residential experience, where they raise their kids and now they essentially have a commercial operation right next door to their residential home. And again, I have 2 elderly moms. My parents are well in their 80s. It's not taking exception to the need for these facilities. It's just how many are located and in terms of concentration in the same neighborhood.
It's an issue that many, many cities are grappling with on a continual basis, and there are no easy answers. We can say that we'll look at it, but unfortunately I don't think there is a great, I don't believe there's a lot to do, but that doesn't mean that we won't look at it, and we can talk with planning and with code compliance. But unfortunately in the past, because of the restrictions in federal law is what really is one of our biggest issues.
Now, I'm assuming, because these are state licensed facilities, that the state is doing the proper inspections to make sure that the folks that are in these facilities are being properly cared for? That's the other question I had is...
Well, I couldn't really speak to the level of inspections. The only experience I have had to do with different types of group homes that inspectors came out in response to complaints. But I don't know what kind of schedule of inspections they have. Routine.
That seems like a place to start, is first of all, if facilities like this are going to exist, we all recognize what's going on in the state of California, and I'd have serious questions about if the state is keeping up their responsibility in making sure that the folks that are staying in these facilities are getting the proper care and are in a safe environment with respect to fire standards and building and safety. Virtually all of these homes have been altered and construction changes in order to conform with some of the requirements for these facilities. I don't know how many people are actually living in those homes in terms of on-site people getting care. But I think we need to look at, one, are there state records that the city can review to find out if, in fact, these elderly people are living in a situation that is safe for them, that is clean, that is appropriate? And then the other issue is, in terms of the congregation, how many of these facilities are on a street? And if there's nothing that we can do about that, then I think there's a public education process that we need to look at with respect to the folks that have lived in these neighborhoods for a long time and see a changing of the character of their neighborhood. If in fact we're precluded because of state and federal law, then that information needs to be shared with folks in those neighborhoods. And I think our first step needs to be a review of some state records to find out if these facilities are being inspected and if the folks that are living there are getting cared for appropriately.
And I can say that I have had experience working with some of the state agencies. You can get the information from them. Different types of homes have different siting policies, right. So we can look at those as well, depending on what it is. And there are some abilities to influence, as well as to look at what the state rules are. So those are all things. And I have to say that when we do get sometimes inquiries from residents, we do work with code compliance to do a letter explaining sort of the rules of the road and where we're coming from. So we do try to do some of that education. And again, that's something that we can look into, but unfortunately, we don't always have as much leeway as we'd like.
And I recognize that, and there's a reason for it. I mean, they weren't completely, for a change, asleep at the switch at the state level when they looked at regulating these issues, because they recognized that there would be tremendous pressure on local city councils to not allow any of these facilities ever. We've had those issues in the Westlake area over the years. So I'm not suggesting that we want to eliminate them, but I do think that in terms of changing the complete character of a neighborhood, and first and foremost ensuring that the folks that are living in these facilities are getting the proper care and living in a safe environment. I think we have a responsibility. They're living in our city. I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we're at least checking and making sure those inspections or whatever needs to occur are happening when they're supposed to happen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mrs. Bildel, opinion.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Spector. I wanted to really confirm the difference between assisted living facilities, transitional housing, and so forth. At this point, with this amendment before us, we have assisted living facilities pertaining only to elderly care now being allowed or proposed to be allowed in commercial public land R1 and R2 zones.
Yes.
What about transitional housing?
Transitional housing would be allowed.
Halfway houses.
Well, that's a different classification.
It is a different classification. Where are those currently allowed?
And are you speaking of which type of halfway house for people getting out of the penal prison system, or?
No, for example, residents who have now fulfilled the 6-month minimum requirement to be allowed to stay at an emergency shelter and now have to be moved to other housing.
Yes. Under state law, the city must allow this classification, the transitional housing, which is, I guess you could call it temporary housing. Not as temporary as an emergency shelter, but it's not permanent. That those have to be allowed in subject to the same standards as conventional housing, you know, just market rate housing or any other kind of housing. So if someone wanted to occupy a single family home and they happen to be coming out of an emergency shelter, that would be an option. Generally, it's going to be multiple family, you know, apartments, rental housing.
Okay, so the city can dictate the zoning for assisted living facilities, but not necessarily for transitional housing.
Yes. Yes. Basically, it's subject to the same zoning requirements as regular housing, for lack of a better term. Yeah, and you're talking about apartments, high-density housing, as a practical matter.
Would transitional housing also require state license?
I don't know. I don't believe so.
And those are normally privately run?
Well,
some of them are.
They're nonprofits, that social service agencies. You know, the Area Housing Authority has some, and many mansions.
With allowing, how many emergency shelters might we possibly have in our city once this ordinance passes?
Well, I think it would be very unlikely we'd have more than one. Just the operational costs, the startup, you know, land acquisition, construction would be quite high. You know, there's quite a financial obstacle to moving that forward, but there would be nothing to preclude, in a kind of an unlikely sense, there being more than one.
And what prompted staff to remove assisted living facilities now, going to a different category from rural exclusive to currently R1 and R2 zones?
Yeah, well, the thought here was these are low-density residential zones, and that in keeping with the character of those neighborhoods, it would be appropriate to preclude these sort of institutional, this is our thought, institutional kinds of uses into those neighborhoods.
And I go now, move toward the issue of concentration that we already discussed just a few minutes ago. Do we then, by doing that, risk having a higher concentration of such homes in other areas?
Well, this is expanding the opportunities for these facilities compared to today, and I don't think we really have an overconcentration today.
Maybe
we are eliminating the RA and RE zones and moving those to commercial PL, R1 and R2 zones. Why not keep RA and RE?
Maybe I can augment Mr. Spector's comments. Under our current, the type of facility we're talking about is typically for the elderly. Examples would be Hillcrest Royale on Hillcrest Drive, the Renaissance at Grand Oaks on Los Feliz Drive. They kind of come across as fairly high density as a building mass, but they are assisted living for the elderly. The way our current zoning ordinance has been interpreted is that we have allowed those in the PL zone. And typically what will happen is an operator will find a site in an area that's got an appropriate general plan designation in a more intense area, and then come in, meet with us, and file a zone change application for that particular property to be changed to PL, and then along with the special use permit to actually approve the site plan and the architecture and the actual construction of the building. So I think that we're really trying to facilitate those as, first of all, change the code so it's explicitly stated as a permitted use in the PL zone, and then I think allow a little bit more flexibility for that use to be established in other zoning districts, such as the commercial office zone. So we're kind of expanding, I think, a little bit the opportunities there. And again, in each case, it would be subject to a special use permit, where the city has more discretion in approving or denying a project just based on whether it's an appropriate use at that particular location in the zone. It's not a standard development permit where the presumption is that the use is acceptable anywhere within the zone.
The code does not require the city to actually build the emergency shelter. Could that be run by charity organizations, nonprofit organizations then?
Absolutely.
Is that what we might potentially do?
Well, up till now, that's been the talk, is the city would use grant money or some redevelopment money to assist in the construction, but an operator would, on its own devices, provide all
the only
services.
emergency shelters being provided currently are through Lutheran Services, and which other faith-based organization may there be?
You mean in general or in this city?
In the city.
Well, right now we have a rotating winter shelter that's operated by churches, and I couldn't even tell you all the churches that are involved. I'm really not sure. So, fixed place, one location to another.
Thank you.
Additional questions of staff? Mr. Spector, I just, on your slide 6, the third bullet on slide 6, state law preempts local zoning over licensed residential care facilities for 6 or fewer residents. And I think Mr. Fox referenced that. 2 neighborhoods in particular that I believe have, and this is anecdotal, I don't have anything else to prove, but have a disproportionate number of these types of facilities are Shadow Oaks and Canal Hills. And part of the reason for that is that housing stock is now 60 years old, 50 to 60 years old, built in the 60s and 70s, and it was developed with a number of 4, 5, and 6 bedrooms in one-story homes. And a number of the people that original purchasers have moved on. They've kept the properties. Some of them have are being used as long-term rentals, but they make an ideal facility, a 5 and 6 bedroom house for this type of thing, and you'll get 4, 5, 6 even of these types of facilities in one residential block. And I think that's what Mr. Fox was talking about, that ran into, and the amount of activity that goes with it, the movement of people in and out, vans and what have you. The difficulty is that I'm not sure that we have any standard printed material when somebody asks about that, when a resident says, hey, how come? City attorney referenced that we do a letter, we try to do a letter and what have you. each of those takes time, as opposed to having some sort of an informational pamphlet or document on these situations, so that when someone makes an inquiry, we can immediately provide them with the information, the state of the law and what have you. Has that been discussed for us to have in part of our toolbox to respond to residents that question and ask questions about this?
Well, not yet, but that's certainly something that is appropriate, and we could do that.
It just seems to me it's something that could make it a lot easier for everyone to understand. The state has preempted us in this area. These are the rules, and this is the situation. The other thing was on the homeless shelters. I'm hoping that as we look at potential siting for something like this, we also take into account the social services necessary to support that small segment of our population that would need these things, so that there was reference made to Lutheran Social Services and Catholic Charities and what they do at under one roof on Hillcrest, near Hillcrest and Moore Park Road. A homeless shelter, as an example, in that immediate area would have access to the social service network that many of these people need. That the placement of the facility itself would not be at such a remote location that it would create an additional hardship and difficulty to access the social service network that are needed for these. I guess trying to put these things in some sort of a proximity to one another. Is that considered as the discussion goes on with this?
It's certainly one of the considerations, but there are so many, it's hard to meet, ideally all the considerations. One of the things that was important was to make sure that any zones where we would allow this type of use, emergency shelters, have adequate bus transportation for those who needed to take a bus to get where they needed to go. And in a perfect world, it would all be in one place, but it's not a perfect world.
Well, this is one of those situations where we, unlike many cities of our size, because we didn't really become a traditional city in that sense until starting in the 60s. We don't have we're not a 100-and-some-year-old city with a downtown area that has an older section that can be converted to address contemporary issues. We're kind of building, it happened, and we're trying to catch up with it. And so the need for the population, even though it's relatively small in this community, if we're looking as we move towards trying to identify a location for shelter accommodation, we have to keep in mind that this population needs to access the social service network and try and keep that in proximity. And you're absolutely right. Public transportation plays a real important role in this. So. Okay. Any additional questions of staff? If there is nothing further at this time, I'll open the public hearing. And we have one, am I correct in that, Madam City Clerk, one public speaker on this?
Yes, one speaker that gets 5 minutes.
One speaker gets 5 minutes for this, and it'll be Kathy Brodecki. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm Kathy Brodecki. I'm the Executive Director of the Ventura County Homeless and Housing Coalition. We've actually been working with all of the jurisdictions on this kind of language. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight, and I actually did come down to support staff's recommendation. First of all, I've said this to you before, but I want to remind you that in this community and in most of the communities in Ventura County, we do not have permanent year-round emergency shelter. So our vision of what shelter looks like is developed from the winter warming shelter programs. And those programs are totally different from what a year-round shelter would be. For example, in the winter warming shelters, in general, you can come in if you are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. As long as you are not acting out, you will still be permitted to stay in the facility because it's a life-saving measure. But in a year-round emergency shelter, there are rules, In general, they're clean and sober facilities. People are tested so that, we have a very different view of shelter because we don't have one to look at, for an example. I'd like to talk about the 6-month designation first. Both federal and state law limit emergency shelter to 6 months. What we wanted to do by changing the language is really to give more flexibility to the shelter operator. And the example I used was this. If a family had lived in a shelter from January 1 to June 30th and then moved out, moved into a home, suffered a fire later in the year, the language that we had would preclude them from returning to the shelter. So this language gives more flexibility. In general, people don't stay in shelter for 6 months, and most of the shelter operators that I work with would tell you that, the need is great, and in 6 months they should have worked their case plan and they should have found additional housing and saved up the money and be moving on. So again, it's because we are using that winter shelter model in our minds to reference. Year-round shelter looks quite different. And finally, let me talk about the cap. Staff and I had quite a lengthy discussion about that. The removal of the cap is really to allow more flexibility for the shelter operator. Certainly, we don't, the program can be designed, for the number of beds. Suppose you have a 14-bed facility. Once you get to 14 beds, that's it. You don't keep bringing people in. So again, because the winter shelter facility, we take all comers, we're saving lives. We've built up that image in our mind that open the door, here they come. And a year-round shelter is operated quite differently. So I hope that answers your questions.
One second, please. Mrs. Irwin?
Were you done already, Kathy?
I'm sorry.
Were you all finished?
Yeah, I just wanted to answer your question. I just came down to support staff's recommendations.
No, I appreciate. So
my assumption was you had a question.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Okay, so basically you want to just give flexibility to the operators.
Correct.
Okay, that wasn't really very clear to me. So any shelter would, you're going to look at the parameters of the neighborhood and what fits, and that's how you determine the maximum number. You just don't want the city of Thousand Oaks to impose either of these positions, so there's more flexibility by the operator.
That's exactly right. And if you actually look at the whole staff report, there's a long list of management requirements on an emergency shelter. And they were hammered out over time with staff. We've been at this for many months, not just myself, but other stakeholders as well.
Okay, and one other question. Are there any other shelters in the East County?
There
permanent.
are no,
I'm not talking about the winter.
No, there are no year-round emergency shelters anywhere. There are 2 DV shelters, one East County, one West County, but the only year-round emergency shelter for men and for women are located in the city of Oxnard, the Lighthouse and the Ventura County Rescue Mission, and then there's a 10-bed safe haven for mentally ill homeless persons in the city of Ventura.
Okay, I appreciate you coming and answering these questions, clarifying, and I want to say once again, you have done an amazing job on this, keeping this issue in the forefront, and we really appreciate your efforts, Ms. Brunecki.
Kathy, could you remind me, please, what is the classification of Stoll House?
Stoll House is a transitional living facility.
Okay, but it does have an emergency housing component to it, doesn't it?
No, it does not. Okay. No, transitional, you could take someone in there off the street, but it's transitional housing. People do come in, because we have so little, emergency shelter, sometimes people do come into the transitional facilities directly from the street, particularly the RAIN project in Camarillo.
Okay. Well, I know there have been instances where emergency, especially families, women and children, immediate accommodation have been accepted at Stoll House if they have the room. And if
yes, and actually that is the model. You really don't want to put a family into an emergency shelter. You really want to get them into housing, and frankly, for my money, the only thing we should ever build is affordable housing, because if we had enough of that, we wouldn't have homeless people.
Excellent. Any other questions? Kathy, thank you very much for coming down, talking to us.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you. Staff response to public comment? Mr. Spector or Mr. Prescott?
I have nothing to add.
I just wanted to almost reiterate, I'm glad you asked the question about Stoll House, because that is transitional housing, and that was developed under the zoning regulations that the city has in effect. And really, this ordinance is just putting something in our code saying we're going to keep doing what we've been doing vis-a-vis transitional housing. We have treated it as permanent housing. Is subject to the same zoning regulations. Stoll House had to meet the zoning requirements of the zone it was in, had to meet the density requirements just like any other apartment building.
It just seems that a number of the areas of social services historically that were not provided by municipalities are becoming more and more the common. It's a thing that a few years ago that the provision of social services wasn't even on the agenda or on the horizon for municipalities of our size, and we seem to be moving more and more into that area because of the need and no other safety net to pick up those responsibilities. We also have a significant need in the area of food shelter. Manna is in dire need of new facilities and expansion and what have you, and other social social services. So, okay, nothing further of staff at this time. We'll close the public hearing. Council discussion. Mr. Fox.
I'm going to move the staff recommendation that the ordinance be read in title only, further reading be waived, and if no objection introduced.
Thank you. I have a motion. Discussion to the motion. There being none, please vote.
The motion carries 4-0 with Councilmember Glancy absent, and the title of the ordinance is an ordinance amending Thousand Oaks Municipal Code, Title 9, Chapter 4, adding or revising definitions for various housing terms, adding or revising zoning regulations for emergency shelters, transitional housing, supportive housing, rest homes, single-room occupancy housing, residential care facilities, and reasonable accommodations and housing for persons with disabilities, MCA 2010-70282.
Thank you, Mrs. Lawrence. We'll now move to item 8B. Give just a minute to let staff switch around on that dais. Our contingent of Boy Scouts are now leaving the chamber. Thank you much for coming down, gentlemen. I hope that you found it interesting, informative, and satisfies your requirement for the badges you're working on. Okay, item 8B, annual construction cost index. The city clerk, please open the hearing, or please call the item.
Hearing advertised as required by law is open to consider agenda item 8B, annual construction cost index adjustment to water and wastewater connection charges, developer fees. A speaker card is available for those wishing to address the City Council regarding this public hearing. All documents for City Council and the official records should be presented to the City Clerk prior to speaking, and speakers are requested to state their name and community of residence for the record. We have one speaker, and the speaker will be allowed 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mrs. Lawrence. Our staff report will be by Public Works Director Mr. Mark Watkins and Nancy Ureta, Associate Financial Analyst. Mr. Watkins, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the public. With me on the dais is Nancy Arrieta. City Council probably remembers Nancy more from when she did a lot of solid waste duties for the city and was here annually for the community enhancement grants, with the public praising her for all her work on that. For the last few years, Nancy's been in charge of our budget process, and you saw her up here on the dais with me during water rates. And so I'm going to let her go ahead and present this item for the annual construction cost index. So, Nancy.
Good evening. This is an annual adjustment for water and wastewater connection fees. These fees are for new services only and do not affect current rate payers. This is consistent with City Council policy of charging new development its full share of impact on the water and wastewater systems. City Council reviews this every fall, and the new fees go into effect in January. Our fees are indexed with the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index. And over the past year, the index increased by 2.1%. Therefore, we recommend that all of the city's wastewater and water connection charges also increase by 2.1%. This will allow us to continue our capital improvement program. The proposed fees are included in the staff report, and we're happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, Ms. Arrieta or Mr. Watkins? Mr. Fox.
Going way back when, this was really the result of the Citizens Committee that we put together for the wastewater connection fees and developer fees. Is that correct? Just by way of information, this is what I'm hoping that we'll get in some form with the Citizens Committee, which is going to be coming up a little bit later on the agenda on water rates. So here we are a number of years later dealing with recommendations that came from our citizens. So just an observation for the council.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fox. Any further questions of staff? There being none, at this time we'll open the public hearing, and we'll take public testimony. The speaker, Mr. Nick Kidwai. Good evening, Mr. Kidwai.
Good evening, Mayor Gillette. Yes, full 5 minutes for speaking on something which ain't that important, but that's the rules. Honorable Mayor, City Council, Nick Iqbal Kidwai, resident of Newbury Park. I wish more people, and the scouts have left, which is very disappointing, would read the council packet on this. And Mr. Bride is sitting over here. I used to bring the Constitution and have it in my vest, and he probably has it. I mean, I want the Constitution that the whole country is based on. It's a small little document, and it's 59 pages of hogwash. That's what I call it, with all due respect. And I will read part of it, but before I start, the TOTV may show this. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, if you burn the paper, you use the ink, why don't you talk about it? Why is this signed by Mayor Glancy from 2009? Staff should have addressed this. I mean, it is signed and then and cut off. So these are the things. I mean, why are you wasting paper? I mean, why did the staff report not talk that you are taking a year to come up with these numbers or something like that? Thank you, Mr. Fox, for reading. It's very wonderful, important reading. In fact, that's why, I mean, I should be upset, and the general citizen should be upset that you do not have parking available. And I brought that up, but the city manager never responded to that. And you know, you have the bad manners to be reading staff reports when just one citizen takes the time to come over here. I'm glad that the overhead can show it. I mean, City of Thousand Oaks charging $9,000 versus Simi Valley for $4,300, City of Ventura for $4,000, City of Camarillo, 2,900 or 2,000 or whatever. Why the discrepancy? I mean, why are the citizens being gouged in the city? I mean, for the past several years, we are in a deflationary cycle. I don't know if the council knows it. You would not know it because you, except for the last year, you really have not tightened the belt. But I mean, in my job, I mean, we had reduced the pricing at the wholesale level, which translated at the retail level, and I don't know what kind of index that you use, and I'm sure, I mean, you're using an industry index, but that's the problem. I mean, I'm glad that patriots like Mr. Bride are sitting in the audience, is that they are skewed against the taxpayer. I mean, people will say, well, this is for connection charges. But I mean, my kids cannot afford to live in this community, and that's true with so many people. I mean, I can barely live over here, and the reason so many of us can live here is because we bought 10, 20 years ago. Because these connection charges are ultimately paid by the homeowners. They're not paid by developers. I mean, the fees are just passed. In fact, I work for a company based out of North Carolina, and I attest to the fact that I was paid North Carolina wages living in Thousand Oaks. And what that means is that I went there for meetings and talked to the manager of shipping and went to his home and said, how much is it? Well, not even six figures, $95,000 now. I bought it for $50,000. Went to HR director's house on 2 acres, $150,000. And the same way, I mean, their payments are $800, $900. That's why they're able to. Thank you, Mr. Fox, for finally looking at me. I really appreciate that. I want to read something very interesting, Mr. Fox. G from your report. The strength factor. I mean, I'm also a chemist of sort. I mean, this is the kind of garbage that's put and nobody objects to it. It's just voice vote and nobody reads it. Strength factor. SF. SS is another abbreviation. BOD. BOD. I'll read it. Is a number which converts the biochemical oxygen demand, BOD, and suspended solids of a discharge to a numerical value in proportion to average residential levels. BOD is equal to 200 milligrams per liter. L, I don't know what that stands for, liter. And SS is equal to 200 milligram in the same variables. I mean, this is why we are, I mean, that's why we are no longer competitive. I mean, it's a laughing stock that our president is in India and asking that we get jobs, and I listen to the Indian TV and they say, well, America is down. I mean, wake up, council people. I mean, take the bold action that other cities are not doing and repeal some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kidway. Any staff response to any of the public testimony?
Just very briefly, Mr. Kidway referred to attachment 1, which is the strikeout. And so in that case, the way we work the strikeout is we show what the old language in the ordinance is, and we strike out and show what the new language would be. And so that's where we have Mayor Glancy's name and the strikeout and Mayor Gillette included. And the new ordinance, the second reading will be after 30 days, and so that one is actually left blank with the mayor. On connection fees, the connection fees for the City of Thousand Oaks are high, and that decision was purposely made by council so that all the new development that's occurred in this community in the last 10 to 15 years paid its own way. If that wasn't the case, then our wastewater rates would be much, much higher. So at this point, the monthly wastewater rates that our residents pay are the lowest in the county. And we've got other agencies in this county that pay 3 and 4 times what our residents pay, and it's because they did not make the investment with their connection fees in our capital program. And so that was a purposeful decision by the City Council, and like I said, it makes new development pay its own way rather than putting that burden on existing ratepayers. Okay. And I think that answers those questions. Anything else, be happy to answer.
Any further, any further questions of staff? There being none at this time, then I'll close the public hearing and council discussion will of the council. Mr. Fox.
Thank you. I'm going to move the staff recommendations, item 1 and 2. And I'm glad Mr. Watkins pointed out that it's easy to come up and show discrepancies between rates of other cities. In fact, we saw a lot of that in the last couple of months. But when you dig just a little bit deeper, you find out that the reason their rates are higher is so existing property owners pay the lowest wastewater rates in the county. And new development pays the lion's share of it. That was a policy decision the council put in many, many years ago. And that recommendation itself came from a citizens committee. So it's important to point out that, yes, you're paying high new connection fees for new development because new development is paying its full 100% recovery of what it costs the city to provide those permits and those services. And so I'm glad Mr. Watkins pointed that out. If you're an existing Thousand Oaks resident, you pay some of the lowest wastewater rates in the entire county. And that is no mistake or no coincidence. That's what's done purposefully. So certainly I'm going to move forward on these recommendations, and thanks to staff for a good report. Thanks very much.
I have a motion. Comments to the motion? There being none, please vote.
The motion carries 4-0 with Councilmember Glancy absent. And the two ordinance titles is an ordinance adjusting and setting fees and discharge limits and restating rates of the city wastewater division, and an ordinance adjusting and setting fees and restating rates of the city water division.
Thank you, Mrs. Lawrence. We'll go to item 9A, department reports. Initiation municipal code amendment for procedural and technical changes to zoning ordinance. Mr. Spector, you're up again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. As you mentioned, this is a request to have the council initiate a municipal code amendment to deal with some procedural items, some miscellaneous cleanup, and I'll just summarize what those involve. This amendment would change findings for approval of special use permits and other planning entitlements. The reason that we're seeking to change the findings because some of the findings are awkward and difficult to understand and implement. And this amendment, the intent is to create findings that are clearer and easier to apply. Second item we'd like to address in this amendment is to establish criteria for deeming an inactive application to have been withdrawn. Once in a while, there's an applicant that doesn't respond to our requests to give us information or sometimes fees that are needed to continue processing the application. And at the moment, there's no procedure for dealing with these types of applications that are just not moving forward. And I think we need a procedure to close these applications if the applicants don't respond. And that's what this amendment would do. Number 3 has to do with extensions of time for applications, entitlement applications that are associated with tentative tract maps that receive automatic extensions of time. What are we talking about, automatic extensions of time? Under state law, from time to time, the legislature grants automatic extensions of time to tentative maps, tentative tract maps, if you will. Most of the time they're residential, that have not yet expired. So they may give them an extra 3 years, 2 years, whatever. But the legislature has not extended the planning entitlements that go along with those maps. And what we're talking about here usually is a residential plan development permit. So we think it's reasonable if the legislature adopts an automatic extension for a map, for a condo project, let's say, that the entitlement for the construction or the design of that project also get extended. The fourth item that we'll be addressing excuse me, has to do with the title of the RPD OS zone. This is a zone that we apply to specific plans, residential specific plans in the city. Well, the problem with that particular label is it causes confusion. The public reads the OS suffix, RPD OS, and they get it confused with the open space zone. And in order to eliminate that confusion, we're proposing to relabel or retitle that zone. And lastly, the last change has to do with the airport planned development zone. That zone applied at a time when there was an airport in Thousand Oaks. There's no longer an airport, so that zone is no longer used. It's not needed, and we're proposing that that designation be repealed. And that concludes our presentation for today. And we recommend that the council forward this particular item for staff to process and take it to the Planning Commission for a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Spector.
You're welcome.
Did you have anything further, Mr. Prescott? Okay, fine. Questions of staff? Mrs. Spildale-Opinion.
Thank you. Good evening again, Mr. Spector. I have a question regarding item number 3, the automatic time extension. Currently, there is an automatic, not an automatic time extension, but an extension of sorts that limits it to 3 extensions for a residential development after every 3 years. Which one does that apply to? To which category?
Which category of
Yes.
project?
Is that part of the? I'm wondering whether that is part of the Subdivision Map Act.
It's Subdivision Map Act,
It
yes.
is.
Well, maybe I can augment that. The city's municipal code for both subdivisions and other entitlements like RPD permits, the initial permit is granted for a 3-year period, and then the applicant, if they haven't either built the project or recorded the map, can come in for 2-year time extensions, so that's like a total of 7 years. And then after that, the code doesn't provide any authority for further time extensions. The approval would expire. They have to file a brand new application. From time to time, the state legislature grants automatic extensions of subdivision maps, tentative tract maps that haven't been recorded, over and above whatever the limits of local ordinance might be. So if you got a project like Mr. Spector described, a condo project where you have, or it could even be single-family residential, where you have a subdivision map that's granted for a certain period of time, and then pursuant to state law, that keeps getting extended. But the RPD permit, the actual construction permit that goes along with it, isn't covered by state law. And so the purpose of this would be to allow in our code for those automatic extensions to also apply to the RPD permit that went along with the tract map, where they were granted by state law.
But at what time does it stop? When everything runs out and they reapply and then the same thing happens? I actually am remembering a residential development in the city that took almost, 15 years to be built. I don't think that is a service to the residents or the neighbors surrounding that particular project. It is indeed a disservice, in my opinion. Where do we then set the limit if we will automatically extend or allow extensions?
Are you speaking of a single-family tract that took a long time to build out? This is probably slightly different. A single-family tract can record, and the lots could be there. And in the event of a market downturn, it could take an extensive period of time for them to build out, because the demand isn't high enough to build out that tract. That's not what we're really addressing here. We're talking about the time that it takes for the builder to record the tentative map in the first place.
Okay, so the benefit is then for the applicant?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think maybe just to expand on that case you were talking about, that was a case where the subdivision and the corresponding, and in fact that was in the Hillside Plan Development Zone, so it was an HPD permit. They were approved maybe back in '89 or so, and they did, the subdivider did record the map, so then there weren't any time extensions further needed for the map. But they hadn't built the home, so they kept coming in for extensions on the RPD permit. And those extensions were granted, but they were having trouble actually building the project, and as they started to build it, they ran into difficulties. I think the developer changed. So it was a matter of actually continuing construction under an approved permit. That it did go on for many, many years.
I'm glad how you can read my mind exactly which development I was referring to. But I am nonetheless concerned with automatic time extensions. I think while it is a benefit or can be a benefit to the applicant, we also have to take into consideration what impact that might have on the neighborhood. Thank you.
Any additional questions of staff? There being none, this is not a public. Mr. Fox.
I just wanted to join Ms. Billet's opinion in as I understand it, staff is making the clarification between a residential extension and a for like a condominium and an apartment. That's what we're dealing with this evening, not a residential single-family dwelling residential project.
It could be single-family. Apartment normally isn't accompanied by a tentative map.
Okay, so what is exactly the clarification? Because I would agree that what is the benefit I see from a standardization standpoint? Why would we want to have the city policies parallel to the states if in fact you were interested in these extensions? If we're not interested in extensions, which I think there's a good argument to be made that after 7 years that you need to go back to the drawing board.
I think what we're dealing with today is to initiate the amendment, and that is certainly something that we can look at as we make our recommendations, is the pros and cons of automatic extensions,
All right.
on the future.
I'll, for the sake of evaluating this and getting, really a thorough evaluation, I tend to, I'll support that. But my own preference is, absent some really overriding information from staff, is that I'm not interested in granting extensions. I think 7 years is more than enough time. And in fact, I would argue it's too long, particularly in the environment that we're in today. Because I know staff's aware it causes a lot of problems. Somebody moves into a home, they don't know what's going on. Next thing they know, wait a minute, there's this development that's been lying dormant for almost a decade. So do you need a motion, Mr. Gillette, or is...
Yes, we're open. Whatever pleasure of the council.
I'll move the staff recommendation for purposes of just evaluation and report back to the council. That's all I got.
Okay. We have a motion. Comment to the motion? Ms. Spilda, opinion?
I will support the motion, but with the caveat that I am very reluctant about the automatic time extensions, and that staff, and I urge staff to really research that and to bring back to the council. But that is a problem. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Fox, maker of the motion, additional comment? Being none, please vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. Item 10, Redevelopment Agency reports. We have none. Item 11, Committee, Commission, Board reports. A, Cultural Affairs Commission appointments. Myself and Councilmember Fox. Mr. Fox, since you kind of chaired our subcommittee, you want to take this?
Thank you, Mr. Gillette. First, I want to just thank all the residents and applicants for the Cultural Arts Commission. There were virtually all candidates were really outstanding in their own right, and so I want to congratulate all of them. We had far more candidates than we had positions available, which is usually the case when we reach out and ask for volunteers. That being said, Mr. Gillette and I had an opportunity to interview all the candidates, and our recommendations are attached to the staff report. As council will recall, we identified specific groups that would have representation, and those are outlined in the report as well. This is a major step towards the bigger piece of the puzzle, and that is bringing a coherent and thoughtful approach to the arts as a whole here in Thousand Oaks. And we're going to be looking to the Cultural Arts Commission to look at those issues and really be the workers as it relates to these issues and bring thoughtful recommendations back to the City Council. So the report is there. I'll just briefly read the names: Jerry Louie, Harry Sylvan, Judy Litton, John Bradley, David Mead, Bob Berry, Stephanie Wilson, Eloise Cohen, Marcus Flanagan, Jerry Miller, and Wendy Harper. As council will note, there's a number of new individuals here. We tried to mix our appointments with folks that had experience both dealing with the arts and other issues that we think will come to bear on this group. And at the same time, we wanted to infuse a number of new interested residents who certainly have demonstrated an involvement in the arts, but not necessarily with the city. And so I think we achieved a good balance here, not just with the membership of the committee, but also with their terms that have also been appointed. Mr. Gillette, did you have any additional comments?
Well, thank you, Mr. Fox. I just wanted to reinforce that of the, first of all, the process to get where we are right now has taken a lot longer than anyone ever anticipated. But it involved interviewing and talking to any number of individuals and groups. And some of them we needed to go back more than once, twice, 3 times to make sure that we had as much information as we possibly could have before we move forward with it. Since the primary asset in the cultural inventory, the theaters that are owned by the residents of the city, are at the heart of our cultural arts program within the community. We were trying very hard to strike a balance to get it right the first time, and that's one of the reasons why, or probably the primary reason why it took as long as it did. I want to especially thank the Assistant City Manager, Mrs. Hong, and also the City Attorney, Mrs. Albano, and a number of other staff individuals in the operating departments, Mr. Mitzi and his staff, and all of the folks that worked so hard to bring this forward. For those that have a real interest in this and monitored it, this item has been looked at for years, being in need of addressing and correcting and complementing. To look at the organizational structure, it resembled very closely a plate of spaghetti. And we have done what we believe is the best job possible to get us where we are today. Obviously, it will continue to be a work in progress, but it was very rewarding when we got into the actual interviews to find out not a single weak candidate in the application process. Every one of the candidates that came forward brought something special, something unique, and something very valuable to the process. So it was difficult, a lot of discussion, trying to get the right kind of balance and the right mix. And every applicant, even those with positions from sponsoring agencies, went through an interview with the committee. So I'm pleased with finally getting this recommendation before you, and I think that's about it. Was that the motion for?
Yes.
Let me. Any questions from the council? Anything else?
All right, then I'm going to move the recommendation to appoint the individuals outlined in the staff report to the Cultural Affairs Commission. Also would point out to the council the resolution establishing essentially the duties, functions, and the composition and qualifications. This will be a commission that we would put on the same level as our planning commission. And they will be looking at very, very important issues and making recommendations to the city council.
Thank you. We have a motion. Comments to the motion? There being none, please vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you very much. Item 12A, follow-up reports on meetings, conferences attended by council members. There are none. Item 12B, Item 12B, City Council retiree health insurance benefit. The City Council retiree health benefit issue is something in view of what has occurred in municipal government within the last several months in California. Compensation issues for municipal government has come under very close scrutiny by a number of organizations and individuals. Questioning quantity, appropriateness, all of the issues related to an office that is held primarily on a part-time basis, its appropriateness, and its appropriateness to the jurisdiction. The issue of the health care benefit is something that came up in the city about 6 months ago, questioned strongly by a number of individuals, was repeatedly brought up during the course of the recent city council, the municipal campaign for city council. And my personal experience with it was, I don't know of anyone that ever ran for the Thousand Oaks City Council because of the compensation and benefits. As a matter of fact, my own experience, I wasn't aware of the health care benefit until halfway through my second term on the City Council, when the then city manager made me aware of it. But the benefit is intertwined with the CalPERS retirement system. The state of California currently has a number of bills in both houses looking at compensation for senior administrators and council members. Where that's going to come out, I don't know. But the thing is that it was my feeling that it was something that was worthy of discussion. And in order to do it and do it appropriately, the recommendation is contained in my report to the council, and the recommendation is to authorize the City Council Finance and Audit Committee, currently comprised of Councilmember Glancy and Irwin, to review current City Council retiree health insurance benefit and make a report back with potential recommendations. That is my recommendation and my motion. Comments? Mrs. Irwin.
Thank you. I think it's a great recommendation. I would, I've always thought that this was overly generous, and I know the gentleman from the Taxpayers Union would appreciate for you bringing this forward. And you mentioned looking at increasing the amount of time before employees are eligible for this benefit. I think that that's something we have to deal with when we look at labor negotiations. So this is a first step at exactly what the mayor said, and I think it's a great idea, and I would be happy to look at it with Dr. Glancy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Irwin. Mr. Fox?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea as well, and I think the Taxpayers Association should be commended for responsibly bringing this issue to the council. I think it's good that we review it. I think there's a lot of information out there that may not be well known as it relates to what other cities do. My own personal viewpoint, as someone who's going to spend 20 years in the city council, I think 5 years is not near enough time to get that type of benefit. 1 term and 1 year, I think you need to demonstrate many, many more years of city service for that type of benefit. That being said, I think the committee needs to look at this thing in its entirety, find out what other cities are doing. I also want to say that this council is taking extremely responsible measures as it relates to the Thousand Oaks employees. While I'm not minimizing health insurance for council members, it is a symbolic issue as it relates to the city's budget. And a fair question, but the real issue is the benefits to the city employees, which are negotiable. They come in and meet and confer. But I do want to point out here, as I pointed out during the campaign, the rhetoric and the misinformation regarding these extravagant pensions to Thousand Oaks employees was a complete distortion. The fact of the matter is, while other cities were giving very, very generous pension benefits, Thousand Oaks did not. Thousand Oaks held the line, and while we certainly appreciate and respect the work that our city employees do, I think they give top-level municipal services. We resisted the temptation to increase pension benefits, and in fact, we have very, very reasonable, very responsible pension benefits as it relates to public employees. The issue of public employee compensation versus private compensation, that's a public policy issue that I would suggest goes beyond this city council. But I think this is a good step forward, and in looking at what we're doing for council members, makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to support this 100%.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Ms. Bildale-Pena.
Thank you. I thought that it was quite fair by the Ventura County Taxpayers Association to bring this to everyone's attention, although it had already been discussed before you brought it up. And I was disappointed to read that your presentation on October 26th was described as a unfortunate sneak attack. I don't think it was a sneak attack. I think you had every right to question why council members received this extra benefit. I, too, was not aware when I was first elected that that benefit was available. I was first elected in 2002. This was approved in 1997. And I also didn't know that there was actually going to be city pay. I think at the time it was $18,000 a year. In 1998, 1997, there were, as I was quoted in the paper saying money was growing on oak trees. The times have changed. And I feel that in light of the economy, and it will improve, we really have to make an effort to mirror the private sector more. I don't think that you will find anywhere in the private sector that an employee will be eligible for lifetime health care benefits, although capped benefits be offered after 5 years of service. That just does not happen in the real world, in the private world. It doesn't. And I think that this is a symbolic measure. Change has to come from the top. And I would expect that others would follow the council's examples or leadership. At this point, as I sit here, I don't see the need at all to form a committee to research this issue, period. 3 people are benefiting from this benefit. 2 widows, 1 former council member and mayor, I believe. The cost is not extravagant, actually, but you know what? That is not the point. That's not the point. The point is we have a benefit that is really not available to people in the private sector, and it's not fair. To me, it's an equity issue. I don't see at all that we need to revise this or review this. In fact, I want to see the council make a motion. In fact, I will make the motion tonight that we stop the benefit altogether. No need to spend several weeks, perhaps even months, looking at this. No need at all. So I will not support this motion, and I will make a subsequent motion to actually get rid of this benefit altogether tonight, starting with this council. It shall not be retroactive. It's not fair to the 2 widows and the other council member, former council member, receiving this benefit. But with this council, all 5 of us sitting here, with the exception of Mr. Glancy, who is not present tonight,
we should just start with this council moving on forward and eliminate this benefit altogether, and that will be my subsequent motion.
Okay. As I said when in the document that I sent forward, the benefit is involved with the CalPERS retirement system and also interfaces with state legislation that we're not sure where it's going to go. And as far as taking an immediate action, there very likely could be unintended consequences. I don't see any urgency with the urgency simply does not exist. It's been in place since 1997, and as mentioned, 3 people have taken advantage of it, and what it constitutes, because of the requirements for it, is a Medicare supplement. That's what it is. So with that in mind, let's deal with Mrs. Bill de la Pena's motion first. Comment to her motion? Any additional? Mr. Fox?
I'm not quite sure I understand the motion.
Well, her motion is to, what I wanted to do is to refer this thing to the Finance Committee to make sure that we do everything, that we do it right. There's no urgency, and that we look through the interface of this benefit with the CalPERS retirement system and with the legislature to find out what they're doing on benefits across the state to make sure that we're doing it right, and give everybody a chance to look at it. I see no urgency in this. The fact is, we've got it forward. We're going to look at it. We have a mechanism in place. We don't have to form a new committee, and we take a look at it. The motion is that we take an action right now. That was my motion, that we take a motion right now. Actually, that's right. I was just reminded I got off on that. Let me stop for just a minute. We do have speaker cards on this.
Okay.
So let's get the speaker cards dealt with, and then we'll come back for the discussion. First speaker, and Madam City Clerk, amount of time on these? 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Our first speaker, Mr. Nick Kidwai. Mr. Kidwai.
Nick Kidwai, Director, Concerned Citizens of Thousand Oaks. It could be not more obvious that citizens are not welcome to speak. I mean, it's like a private club. I mean, my thing about parking not being free has not been answered even up until now. I mean, if TOTV can show that, I went on the Laserfish because, thank God, to technology and openness, we have that. But I could not find, in fact, the 98 employee manual, 163 pages, is signed by Mr. Dennis Gillette himself. But I could not, I mean, it was staff's position, and you should have asked it. I mean, you say you have enough time, that where is the ordinance, and where are the minutes for this ordinance? As somebody, I mean, one council member who's being very thrifty here was quoted in the paper as saying that we thought that money grew on oak trees. I mean, I've been coming here since '93 and being laughed at by you folks because I objected to Mr. Brimhall's extravagant contract in 1993. And so people, and there used to be many other people that used to come over here and complain. TOTV, if you can show that, that shows the 663 pages. So I would like, on behalf of concerned citizens, to find out the motion and the exact time when this was done. And I believe, like a naive person in my city government, that every 2 years you came that, well, we have to raise our salaries because of the state law. This is from Fullerton, my other hometown. I went on the website. The population of 110,000 is very similar to us, but they only get paid $9,500 for the mayor and $8,300 for the other council members, not about 20,000. And then they also get medical benefits, but the total comp comes out to $27,000. But there, the city manager has bitten the bullet, and he's taking a $10,000 cut. I mean, that's what I've asked over here, not a freeze in salary. And unlike council members over here, they have a resolution where they are taking a cut in the salary. I mean, this is what makes America great, and this is what needs to be done over here, which is not being done over here. In fact, Mr. Phil Gatch is getting $211,000 a year for sitting at home for life. That's on the website. I'll send you the link. And Mary Jane Laz is getting $180,000 plus free medical benefits. So this is what is wrong. I don't begrudge the clerks for what they make, but it's the top dogs. And this is destroying the United States. This is destroying Thousand Oaks, and we need to take some action.
Thank you. Mr. Clint Mekovich. Mr. Mekovich. Followed by Carolyn Guillot.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Clint Matkovich. I've spent all of my 29 years here in Thousand Oaks. I agree with Claudia's proposal tonight. Abolish the health benefits to the elected officials of this community. It's like Al Adams said during the campaign, this city is drowning in surveys and talks. Why do we need to talk about this subject? Just get rid of it, save yourself some time, save the taxpayers some money. And I believe, as a resident, I would like to suggest that while you're at it, give yourselves a pay cut, because I think that you should lead by example while the rest of the people in the community are suffering and losing their jobs and do not have any health insurance at all. The public should know that the elected officials have private sector jobs which provide health insurance coverage, and I think that's what we need to do. We need to abolish this plan, and while you're at it, vote to give yourselves pay cuts. Thank you.
Thank you. Carolyn Guillot, followed by Diane Hawkins.
My name's Carolyn Guillot, live in Thousand Oaks. I don't have much to say. I just think it sounds like people on the council didn't even know this benefit was there. It just seems like it's an extra perk that isn't needed. I think our city should cut back like other people are doing. It doesn't matter, you want to study other cities, what they're doing. I don't think it matters what other cities do. Let's do what's right for us. Mr. Fox said that the number of years is too low, but I think increasing the years is still not acceptable. Let's cut the benefit at the end of the term of office. Thank you very much. I agree with Claudia's motion.
Thank you. And Diane Hawkins.
Hello, I'm Diane Hawkins. I live in Newbury Park. I too appreciate that citizens and the Taxpayer Association have brought this issue to the attention of citizens and taxpayers like myself. I do think that Claudia's recommendation is the most practical. However, I also understand that there may be considerations that we're not thinking of tonight that could have ramifications. For instance, Mr. Gillette's mention of CalPERS and state law and so forth. At the same time, I disagree with the recommendation to have an internal audit to be done by the Finance and Audit Committee, because with all due respect, in the name of practicality and common sense, to have an internal committee take a look at its own benefits would be like putting raccoons in charge of the koi pond. it doesn't make a lot of sense. As an alternative, I'd like to recommend that instead a committee of citizens and taxpayers get together, meet, and make a formal recommendation to the City Council. That would be fair, there would be no conflict of interest, no bias, and there would also be an opportunity for coverage in our local papers. So if the council feels that it cannot, for legal reasons or other considerations, make a decision tonight to terminate future retiree health insurance benefits, I would say that we bypass this internal committee and instead go to a citizen and taxpayer committee to make that very important recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our speaker cards on this item. Let's go back. Mrs. Irwin.
Okay, did you make the motion, or did Ms. De La Pena make the motion?
Well, I'm going to deal with Mrs. Bill De La Pena's motion first, but that's what we're. Let me do this. Would you like to restate your motion, and then we'll take up the discussion?
Yeah, the motion would be to eliminate this lifetime health benefit for a council member and his and her entire family, which we have after 5 years of public service.
Okay. Mrs. Irwin?
I will make a comment to the motion and to some of the speakers also. First of all, Thousand Oaks has not been irresponsible. We have a balanced budget. We have cut $10 million from our budget over the last number of years. And I think, Mr. Bill De La Pena, you're grandstanding. There are unintended consequences to not looking at what the effects are of this benefit. So I would first like to ask the city attorney to tell us what are potential unintended consequences of just dropping the benefit this evening.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the public, and staff. First off, it would be very difficult to do that because this has to do with our CalPERS health benefits and CalPERS state law that dictates if you're in a CalPERS health system like we are, insurance is under CalPERS, under all those rules, then you have to offer retiree health benefits. So there are real implications of how to do it. I was going to suggest that if that motion and the council's interested in that, the more appropriate route would be to say, come back and tell us how to unwind it, because you can't just say it's going to be gone tonight. If you did that tonight, you could actually jeopardize the benefit that the council is receiving of having health care provided to you right now. I would be very concerned. There's lots of implications. When we are involved with PERS, they have rules. It doesn't mean that we can't look at it for the future, or how do you unwind it. I would think those are all the kind of things that if you send it to a committee, you're going to come back with all that information, as well as how do we go about changing, if it was an issue of changing years, an issue of whatever it might be. But there are ways to do it, but you have to do it right, and I can tell you right now, the unintended consequences could be very detrimental to just say tonight, it's gone. So at the very least, if council is even thinking that way, the majority, that you need to give us the authority to at least look at how do we unwind it and come back to you.
Okay, I appreciate that explanation. And secondly, there is plenty of opportunity. It is Dr. Glancy and I will look, and you will see it on the agenda, and we will be, if you think that we have the wrong recommendation, come to the council meeting and say that we haven't appropriately looked at it. I don't really see right now, I feel it is overly generous, and certainly I would like to say, let's get rid of it, or tonight, or let's make it 20 years, or whatever it is, but we do have to look at all the unintended consequences. If you don't like what the committee came up with, please come to the council meeting and tell us that you don't think that we were the most necessarily trustworthy group to do it. But I am going to do the right thing for the citizens. So I am not going to approve your motion, and I will support the motion that Dr. Gillette, you are Dr. Gillette now, the mayor will put forward after.
Thank you. Additional comments to the motion? Maker of the motion, Ms. Bildo-Pena.
I have actually stated that publicly, that I would be very much in favor of eliminating this benefit. What I'm saying tonight is what I have said before. It's nothing new. It's not grandstanding at all. It's just a matter of doing what's right. I'm not saying that you're not trustworthy or the committee wouldn't be trustworthy at all. I'm just saying that it's time to have the public sector mirror the private sector. And right now, that benefit is not fair. At least one council member agrees. It's a very, very generous benefit. And in order to appease or make the city attorney feel a little bit more comfortable, certainly I can make the motion to tell us, for staff to tell us how to unwind it, rather than have a committee review everything. My motion will then be, my subsequent motion will be to ask that the staff come back with recommendations to actually eliminate and repeal this particular ordinance, which was passed in 1997 and nothing else. That would be my motion.
Okay, we have any additional comment to the motion? Mr. Fox?
Yeah, I think the city attorney outlined a much more responsible approach here. As I sit and listen to the discussion, number one, we're missing a council member. And in light of where that council member is right now, I think we ought to deal with this with a 5-person council, number one. I think referring it to a committee is the most prudent and responsible thing to do. Let's get the facts. I would also point out that if individual council members think the benefits are out of line, it's certainly appropriate to not accept those benefits. And I haven't heard that. I'm hearing a lot of discussion about what's right and everything else. It is certainly up to each individual council members. If you think you're getting paid too much and if you think the benefits are too much, then give them up. You can do that very quickly. But I think in terms of policy for the city, we need to look at this. I think the city attorney brought in a lot of issues that we need to look at and certainly not make knee-jerk reactions here from the dais. So I'm not going to support this motion, but I will certainly support sending it and evaluating it and bringing it back.
Thank you. Additional comments to the motion? Maker of the motion, please.
Thank you. The city attorney informs us tonight that we can't just not accept this particular benefit. We have to look, or staff has to look at how we undo it. Certainly, this is a very sensitive issue, and I completely understand that not everybody would want to give up this particular benefit immediately, and nonetheless, as I have said before, these are benefits not available to the average person working in the private sector and tightening their belts. So what's fair is fair. I think this is fair. The recommendation makes complete sense and is quite responsible, and I urge my colleague to join me in voting and supporting this motion.
Thank you. City Manager, you have a comment on this?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, just to also shed some additional light and clarification. The benefit that is in place, it is indeed optional for council members who are eligible once they leave city service. They do not have to take the benefit, and there have been at least 2 council members since this has been in effect who opted not to take the benefit. And council members also have the option not to take the medical insurance benefit or to take a less costly one, and council members have done that. So just pointing out some facts here, you don't have to take it.
Yes, maker of the motion.
As maker of the motion, I do have final comments, not the city manager. But yes, we know we can reject it. That is not the point. And the point also is not what other cities are doing. And it just irks me to see how city staff is trying to somehow massage it in a different way. And again, my apologies to the Taxpayers Association. Your appearance 2 weeks ago was described as a sneak attack by city staff. That was at all not the case, and I just wanted to mention that to you. Anyhow, my motion stands that we have staff come back with ways to undo this particular benefit. And yes, it's optional. Not everybody uses it, and I said it doesn't cost a whole bunch of money. It really doesn't. This is more symbolic.
All right, thank you. Please vote.
The motion is a tie 2-2. Then that would be a 3 or 1-3 failed.
Okay. Then I will go back to the original motion, and I should mention also, for purposes of clarification. Well, wait. Let me get to the motion first. And the motion is my recommendation to authorize the City Council Finance Audit Committee, Dr. Glancy and Mrs. Irwin, to review current City Council retiree health insurance benefits and report back with potential recommendations and suggestions. Comments to the motion? Mrs. Irwin.
Yeah, and I, again, would urge everybody sitting in the audience, when this comes back, please come back and listen to what we say, and if you disagree with it, we want to hear your public. That includes you, Mr. Kidway. This is the responsible thing to do. We hear what you're saying, but we need to make sure that this is done the right way. And then one other thing, I actually have to disagree with Ms. Bildel-Opinion on this, too. This actually could be, you're saying this is a symbolic thing, but if you are talking about somebody that retires or steps out of office right at age 50, it is a very costly benefit. So with the way that it's set up right now. So I think it's to look at either tweaking it a lot or getting rid of it is more than symbolic.
Additional comments to the motion? As the maker of the motion, there's something that really needs to be clarified. As this issue was brought up, I brought this issue up during the candidate forum here at City Hall. It was sponsored by the League of Women Voters. That fact was overlooked in the newspaper article when the discussion was made. So I brought this forward, and it didn't grow legs at that time, but it was on the table. And I just think that it's important, as long as we want to make sure the facts are out there. And I'm really concerned something like this, the council, obviously, we're going to look at and take an attack on the integrity of members of the council to do an objective analysis on something of this, like this. This council, no, you can shake your head all night long, but it's my turn to talk. This council deals with a $263 million budget, $250 million a year, and we do the very best we can in the interest of the 130,000 residents of this city. This is something that none of us put in place. We inherited it. It's an issue of importance, especially in view of some of the things that are going on right now in municipal government statewide, and we're willing to take a look at it and as objectively as possible deal with it. In the 47-year history of the city, there's been three members of this council that have taken advantage of this, and 2 of them are since deceased. And what it is, it's not an excessively expensive benefit, but it is something that's an irritation benefit, especially in view of the current economic situation that we find ourselves in. This isn't 1997. This is 2010, and we're willing and agreeable and trying to take a look at it. That's the extent of my comment on it. As the maker of the motion, please vote.
The vote shows a 2-2. Mayor Gillette, I'm assuming you're a affirmative vote, which it doesn't state, so 3-1.
Item 13, City Manager, follow-up request from the public. Anything additional?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we did hear from a speaker earlier, and I forgot to mention this, about the parking charges for the parking facility here during council meetings. We will follow up on that. They should not be charged. If you're coming here for a council meeting or to do business with the city and there's an event going on in the theater, you should not be charged. So I understand there were 2 or 3 people who were charged, so we're going to follow up on that. City Hall will be closed on Thursday, November 11th, for Veterans Day. The next City Council meeting will be next Tuesday, November 16th, and at this point we have one public hearing, and that has to do with an issue that was raised earlier, the roof-mounted solar panels parking lot renovation at Newbury Park Branch Library. So that's on the agenda, and it looks like under committee reports, we're going to, the Community Events Endowment Fund Committee is going to come to council with their recommendations for funding. And that's it by way of city manager follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitnick. Item 14, closed session for City Council Conference Room 2. Mrs. Albano, would you care to announce those?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the public, and staff. City Council will be going into closed session. The first is anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, subsection B. And we had 4 cases listed. We actually are only going to be discussing 3 cases. And also conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, subsection C. We had 2 cases listed, but we will only be discussing 1. There will be no need to report anything out from those closed sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam City Attorney. Item 15. As we prepare for our adjournment this evening, our first adjournment tonight is in memory of Doris Hoos, who passed away October 22nd. Doris celebrated her 80th birthday this past September. She was born in Chicago and grew up in the Midwest and attended Indiana University. In 1952, Doris met and married Dick Hoos, who became a Thousand Oaks Council member in 1966. Dick served on the City Council until 1970 and as mayor from 1969 and 70. Doris and Dick were married for 57 years, and together they raised 5 children. Doris, always busy with church and school activities, returned to work in 1972. After her return to work, Doris worked as the News Chronicle editorial page editor, administrative assistant at Amgen, and proofreader at Sage Publications. The Hoos were world travelers as well as longtime members of the Canal Valley Cloggers. Active in her community, Doris volunteered as an usher at the Civic Arts Plaza Theaters, served as a member of the Volunteers in Policing, worked as a volunteer in the Los Robles gift shop, and she was well known at the city for her many House of Volunteer service at the city's welcome desk. Everyone who knew Doris was aware that her family was the love of her life. On behalf of the City Council, I send our deepest regrets to the entire Hoos family. Doris will be dearly missed by her family and friends. Our second adjournment, I'm going to ask, I believe Councilmember Fox would like to make this one. Mr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also, we're going to be adjourning tonight's council meeting in memory of George Sparky Anderson. Many people in the community read about the passing of George on November 4th. As in keeping with his wishes, I'm not going to chronicle all his professional accomplishments. Those who knew George would know that he was a man of great humility, of great love for mankind. While he was recognized and acknowledged for his accomplishments in Major League Baseball, there is no question in my mind and those that knew George that his biggest accomplishment was with his family. Thousand Oaks will truly miss George Sparky Anderson. He leaves his wife Carol, his son Lee and Albert, daughter Shirley. George and Carol lived in Thousand Oaks for 50 years. I know the members of Cal Lutheran University and St. Paschal's Catholic Church, along with the entire community, passes on the condolences to the Anderson family.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fox. At this time, we'll adjourn to our regular meeting at 6 p.m. in this chamber on November 16th. We are adjourned.